back to Through Inquisitive Kids. Today we're learning about the absolute value. Our learning goals for today is to understand the concept of the additive inverses and to be able to find the additive inverse of a number. Getting a preliminary meaning of absolute value. Mastering the absolute value of rational numbers and the method to realize the thinking of combining number and shape. And to use the absolute value to compare the magnitude of two negative numbers. Please observe these two numbers below. What are the similarities and differences between them? Can you list two such numbers? So first thing I noticed is that they both have the same number on the right side, 3.5, but they have different signs, positive and negative. Okay, here are two more examples of these numbers. So they both have the same number, but signs in front of them, positive and negative. If two numbers has only different symbols, then both of the numbers are each other's additive inverse. We call these two numbers as additive inverses. In particular, the additive inverse of 0 is 0. So there's a statement, and we have to see if it's correct or incorrect. Negative 10 is positive 10's additive inverse. This is correct because they both have 10 as the number, and one is negative, one is positive. 10 is 10's additive inverse. This is wrong because 1 doesn't have the negative sign. 1.5 and negative 1.5 are additive inverses. This is correct because 1.5, they both have 1.5 as their number, and one is negative, the other one is positive. Negative 2 is an additive inverse. This is wrong because there's supposed to be two numbers. Observe the scene of two dogs looking for food in the picture below. Show the scene on the number line and answer these questions. Okay, so both of the dogs start from the tree, and the white dog went west and the yellow dog went east, and they both traveled 3 meters in each of their directions. Now we have to plot this picture on the number line. So the tree right now, we can put it on the number line, it would be at 0, and the white dog would be at negative 3, which is point A, and the yellow dog would be at positive 3, point B. Do they follow the same routes? Are the same distance, length of line segments OA and OB? The two dogs didn't follow the same routes because one went west, one went east. But did they go the same distance? Yes, they did because they both went 3 meters. So they have different routes in positive and negative, but they have the same distance. The absolute value is the distance of a point to the origin. The origin is 0, and the positive 4 to 0 is 4, so the absolute value of 4 is 4, recorded as 4 with the two lines on either side of it. The distance from negative 5 to the origin is 5, so the absolute value of negative 5 is 5, recorded as this. The distance from 0 to the origin is 0, so the value of 0 is 0, recorded as this. Let's do some practice. The distance between positive 7 and the origin is 7 unit lengths because it takes 7 unit lengths to get to 0. And the absolute value of positive 7 is 7, which is recorded as this. The distance between the point of 2.8 and the origin is 2.8 unit lengths. That is, the absolute value of 2.8 is 2.8, denoted as this. The distance between the point of 0 and the origin is 0. The unit lengths, that is, the absolute value of 0 is 0, denoted as this. The distance between the point of positive 6 and the origin is 6 unit lengths. That is, the absolute value of positive 6 is 6, which is denoted as -6 in the two lines. If a represents a rational number, what does the absolute value of a mean? The absolute value of a represents the absolute value of a. Absolute value of a represents the distance between the point of corresponding to the number a on the number axis in the origin. How do you express the opposite of a? How do you express the opposite of a is by putting a negative sign in front of it. What is the relationship of both the absolute values? The relationship is that they're equal. If the absolute value of a is equal to the absolute value of b, then what is the relationship between a and b? The relationship is that a has to be equal to b, or a has to be equal to negative b. Do you understand the above? The number after the sign is the same mean? Let's do some problems. Find the absolute value of the following numbers. The absolute value of 21 is 21. And the absolute value of 49 is 4 over 9. Absolute value of 0 is 0, and the absolute value of a negative 7.8 is 7.8. What does the absolute value of a number have to do with its number? The absolute value of a positive number is itself. The absolute value of a negative number is its additive inverse. The distance from the origin to the origin is 0. Because positive numbers can be represented by a is bigger than 0, and negative numbers can be represented by a is smaller than 0. How can the examples on the page before can be represented? If a is bigger than 0, then the absolute value of is a. If a is smaller than 0, then the absolute value of a is equal to negative a, because a itself is a negative number, and if you minus a negative number, then it's going to be equal to adding that number. If a is equal to 0, then a is... How many numbers have an absolute value of 7? What are these numbers? Two numbers have the absolute value of 7, being 7 and negative 7. There is no number whose absolute value is equal to negative 2, because all absolute values are positive. How many numbers have an absolute value of 0? What is each number? There is one number that has the absolute value of 0, and that's 0. How many integers have an absolute value less than 3? There are 5 integers whose absolute value is less than 3. Negative 2, negative 1, 0, 1, and 2. Plot the following numbers on a number line and compare their sizes. So we have the numbers negative 1.5 and negative 3, negative 1, and negative 5. So we have to plot them on the number line. So negative 5 is the smallest, so it goes on the most left side. And then negative 3 is after negative 5, and then negative 1.5, and then negative 1. Find the absolute value in number 1 and compare their sizes. So, okay, this is number 1, so we have to find the absolute value of negative 1.5. And the distance from negative 1.5 to 0 is 1.5. So the absolute value of 1.5 is negative. So the absolute value of negative 1.5 is 1.5. And the absolute value of negative 3, on the number line, you can see that it's 3. So the absolute value of negative 3 is 3. And now we have to find the absolute value of negative 1, which is 1 away from 0. And then we have to find negative 5's absolute value. And negative 5 is 5 away from 0. So these are the answers. What did you notice in number 1 and number 2? Well, if you compare the magnitude of two negative numbers, so the greater the absolute value is, the smaller is the number. Compare the size of each group below. Negative 1 and negative 5. Negative 5 over 6 and negative 2.7. So we know that, by comparing two negative numbers, if we use the absolute value of each number, the bigger the absolute value is a number, the smaller it is. So the absolute value of -1 is 1, and the absolute value of -5 is 5. And 5 is bigger than 1, which means that -5 has to be smaller than -1. And -5/6 and -2.7 are all negative, so we can use the same thing. And we know that 2.7 is bigger than 5/6, which means that -2.7 is smaller than -5/6. Because -5 is to the left of -1, so -5 is smaller than -1. And because -2.7 is to the left of -5/6, so -2.7 is smaller than -5/6. Given that the absolute value of x is equal to 2 and the absolute value of y is equal to 3, and x is smaller than y, find x and y. From the definition of absolute value, x will have to equal positive or -2, and y will have to equal positive and -3. This is because if x is -2, its absolute value will be 2. And if x will be positive 2, its absolute value will also be 2. And we know that y is positive or -3 because it says the absolute value of y has to be 3, which means that y could be negative or positive but it doesn't matter because all absolute values are positive. And because the absolute value of x has to be 0 and the absolute value of y has to be 3, x will have to be either positive or -2, and y will have to be positive or -3. And because x is smaller than y, and x is equal to 2, and y is equal to 3, or x is equal to -2, or y is equal to 3, that the absolute value of x minus 4 plus the absolute value of y minus 3 equals have to be 0, find that value of x plus y. The absolute value of a number is always greater or equal to 0. That is a non-negative number. If the sum of two non-negative numbers is equal to 0, the two numbers are 0 at the same time, which means that x minus 4 has to be 0 and y minus 3 has to be 0. And so x will have to be 4 and y will have to be 3. And 4 plus 3 is 7. If the sum of several non-negative numbers is 0, then these numbers are all. In this class, we learned about the additive inverses, the nature of absolute value, and comparing the magnitude of negative numbers. Additive inverse, we learned about the 2 points on a number line that is opposite to each other are located on both sides of the origin and are at the same distance of the origin. And the nature of absolute value is that the absolute value of a has to equal larger than 0 or equal to 0. The larger the absolute value of a negative number is, then the smaller is the number. Here's what we learned in this lesson. The additive inverses are numbers whose absolute value is the same while on different sides of the origin. For instance, -7 and +7. Absolute value is always greater or equal to 0. The distance between a number and the origin represented by two lines. The negative number with the larger absolute value has the smallest value.